All right, yeah, so this is planning for unplanned work. Am I too loud? Okay, so I have a new clicker and like a different computer and like all kinds of things are weird here, so let's see how this goes. Nope, didn't like the clicker. Oh well. Okay, so yeah, I am Mandi Walls. I am a DevOps advocate at PagerDuty, which is a strange title for that whatever I do, which is basically DevRel. If you'd like to get in touch with me, you can tweet at me. I'm LNXCHK on Twitter. You can email me. I'm mwalls@pagerduty.com. I will plug that we are hiring. So if you are looking for work or know folks who are looking for work, we are remote first. If you like an office, we have offices in San Francisco, Atlanta, Toronto, Sydney, Lisbon, and London. So, we're everywhere. So I'll make a plug for that. We also have a really great internship program. I've only been at PagerDuty like 2 years, and I've been super impressed with our internship program. So if you know anybody who would be looking for an internship in the next year or so, have them look at our site because it's actually really nice. So yeah, we are talking about planning for unplanned work. So PagerDuty, most of our baseline stuff is about incident response and all that kind of stuff, right? And while we're working on automation and other amazing things, most folks know us as who wakes you up in the middle of the night when something isn't right with all of your stuff. And we want to get better at how we respond to incidents. But we have this dilemma, and Mandi kind of mentioned this yesterday, and I was like, don't steal any of my jokes. So we want to get better at incidents, so we want to improve our incident response. To do that, we need to have more incidents, but nobody wants more incidents. So we want to figure out a way to simulate what we're working on, not just for our responders, also for our incident commanders, and for the other folks who are playing around in this space and helping us resolve all these incidents and fix the things that are going on in our production environments. So we want to do that in a safe way that isn't going to upset all of our customers and all of our users, right? Incident response is very much a muscle, and I will say this, I went through our incident commander training in December, and I am now on a live on-call rotation for the first time since 2011, and that's been super interesting. Getting back into the workflows and the communications patterns and knowing where to go for what Zoom call are we using, what Slack channel are we using. I was scribing and I'm like, am I doing this right? I'm not really sure. There's a lot of uncertainty that you want to help people sort of build up that practice around their incident response. So how do we do that in a way that makes people feel safe and supported and in a place where it's okay to get that practice, right? So we take this as, we use the game days, right? So PagerDuty has used a process we call Failure Fridays. And as the teams have gotten bigger and PagerDuty has gotten larger and we have more products and services going on, it's now like failure any day. There was one going on yesterday afternoon, right? So teams can kind of take their pieces and their services and work on them anytime. So we know lots of folks start using this kind of, anybody using game days? I talked to some folks at lunch yesterday, they were doing them at SAS. So yeah, awesome. So we refer to them, like I said, as Failure Fridays if they happen to fall on a Friday. But the point of the exercise is to make sure that the production operations systems are doing what we need them to do when we need them to do it. And not just our services, but our monitoring, our metrics collection, our dashboards, anything that looks like it's going to help us know what's going on when we're not sure what's going on, right? So we need to know, are our metrics and observability tools giving us the right telemetry in the right way? Are they accessible to all the responders? Are the escalation policies and the notifications and the incident rooms working as we expect them to? We've had problems where an integration doesn't work and we can't talk to Slack anymore. That stuff happens and we need to work through it. Do the actual responders know what's expected of them? Are they aware of our response times? Do they know their boss is going to get pinged if they don't respond in 10 minutes? Are they up on all of that stuff? And if we need to push a fix, how fast could we actually do that? Does it have to go through the full integration process? Do we have a short circuit process? Is there an approval that would have to go through that? And all of those things we want to establish beforehand before we get into a place where things don't work for customers. So we're establishing all of these practices before we get to a real incident. Because real incidents can be super stressful. Like, sysadmins in the room, right? Like, I've been doing this a long time. And before I worked at PagerDuty, I was at Chef, and before that, I was at a little company called AOL. And I have been part of a 7-figure outage, right? Like, that is not fun to do, right? So we want to get people to a place where they feel a little bit more comfortable dealing with all this stuff. Because honestly, like, some folks aren't really cut out for it. Like, they get really stressed out and they like can't think straight, and it gets really worrying for them, and like totally understand that because it is kind of crazy. So when we look at what we want to do for our game day, we want to go into our game day with a goal, right? Maybe it sounds cool to like just go through the data center and pull cables if you happen to have a data center, or like you're scrolling through your assets tab in your cloud provider and just like delete something, right? Sure, that sounds amazing. You have no idea what it is. As long as it's not payroll, who cares, right? That's not really starting from having sort of that reliability plan in mind, right? We don't necessarily want to pull something that people aren't using right now. We want to get some practice around the things that are actually active in production, and we're really being intentional about what that is. So we start to look at the practice of chaos engineering. And when I give a longer version of this talk, and we also have a workshop around it, we do it with Gremlin. So our friends at Gremlin, who are at an offsite this week in San Jose, help us out with the definition of chaos engineering, right? So chaos engineering lets you compare what you think will happen to what actually happens in your systems. You literally break things on purpose to learn how to build the system in a more resilient way going forward. So chaos engineering can make it sound kind of scary, kind of irreverent, right? Like you're not taking things super seriously for some organizations, and they kind of shy away from that, right? You might also find it called fault injection, right? For this kind of practice of intentionally putting errors into the systems in certain ways. And some places they feel that it's a little bit more professional, right? Or more serious. So this is a way we helps us identify the critical paths, right? Through our dependencies, through the components that we have. There's lots of different types of tests you can run in a chaos engineering environment. And depending on what you see in your production environment, some of those tests might be more relevant to you than others, right? When you have a large microservices deployment, lots of interconnected things, you might run what we call a black hole, which is like take something offline. Just pretend that its traffic doesn't exist anymore. What happens to everything else? Does it sit around, time out, just kind of spin its wheels? Does it gracefully fall over? What kinds of things happen there? So you can really sit down and dig through what's going to happen. So we're looking for setting some goals that will help us learn and improve and focus on the customer experience, right? That's the whole point, is to make sure that things are nice for our customers, even when things aren't super nice for us on the back end, right? So we want to keep our customers and users happy and give them the best experience possible, understanding that when we put things in production, we've basically signed a EULA that says something bad's going to happen eventually. Well, you just don't know what it is. So when we're planning our testing programs and our failure scenarios, we want to keep those users in mind, right? We want to improve the reliability and the resilience of the components that our users like the most, where they expect the best experience. And maybe that's your search, maybe that's your shopping cart, maybe that's some other part of your comment section or whatever you might be running. So your testing scenario that only flexes a piece of the application that users don't use, it's kind of like a tree falling in the woods. You know it happened, and maybe it's beneficial for you, but is it going to have the most impact for the resilience for what your users are going to focus on? So we tend to focus on the things that are going to exercise the components that users rely on, which is good because folks rely on us for a lot of production stuff. So to have successful chaos testing game day practice, we want to have some things in place first. I'm glad I went after the observability talk, so that's awesome. We want at least some basic monitoring and telemetry. One of the things that you can learn from chaos testing is where you have blind spots in your monitoring and testing, and that's fine use for it, but you want to have some components up to start with, so you know, hey, I'm going to black hole service A. If no alarms go off to tell you that service A is down, like you've got a hole in your monitoring, right? So starting with those kinds of, that sort of base layer of monitoring and practices there. Then we want to set up our response process. Who's going to be responding? Who is going to go through the exercise? Chaos testing and game days are really this excellent time to practice your end-to-end incident response process. It's how we train our incident commanders. So the folks who are going to come in and sort of lead a call when we have a major incident, because getting practice on that is very much it's an interesting process, and like it's one of the things that people tell us when we do the incident commander training is like, I need to practice this. Like, what happens if I forget it? Like, what do I do? So we include them in the chaos testing process. And it gives them a lower stakes environment. We're still going to do this in production, so hang on. But it's maybe not as stressful as a big production outage. We want to use our incident commanders, we assign a scribe, right? Go through that whole process, and we prepare a post-incident review. The use of that is going to be different than like if we were doing like a big postmortem for an outage, but we still want to get that muscle flexed. Then we're going to establish workflows for fixing things. We lay our groundwork for how much experimentation we want to do. In a real incident, like your SMEs may need to push code or configuration changes to remediate whatever's going on. Would you do that during the game day? Establish that up front. You might get to a place where you're like, we're not going to actually touch production. We're going to see where we need to go here. We find this thing. We think this is going to be the fix, but we're going to push it back through into the next sprint, right? The actual fix. You don't have to actually go the whole way through pushing things out to production. That's fine, right? And then thinking about what you want to get out of this. If you're running all of this testing and running these game days, but the improvements that you find don't make it back into your sprint planning, then you've kind of wasted your time, right? Operational features are features of your service. So when we want to improve those operational features for our customer experience, we want to make sure that everybody's on board with getting those back into the project plan, right? So our business partners, our product managers, understanding that we are after better resilience and better reliability and better customer experience, and everybody needs to be on board with that, right? That's one of my sysadmin soapboxes for those. So improving reliability is a long-range process. So you want to take the time to do this bit of planning before you just kind of dive in. For incident response, and including that as part of your game day, one of the things that we get into is we say for the incident response and the incident commander process is to replace chaos with calm, which is great when I'm then introducing chaos engineering to you, right? So game days are an excellent opportunity to flex all of these muscles. You don't have to mobilize a full incident response for every game day, but it's definitely an option to keep in mind. And then working through your all the components of the IR process, deciding what severities are and who needs to respond and all those things, definitely helps you maintain what would happen in a real world scenario. If I have a core service that I'm testing today with my fault injection, that's probably going to mean if it were to happen in real life, I would have a Sev1, I would need to do stakeholder communications to the board or at least my C-levels, and all those kinds of things would need to happen, right? And that becomes a bigger planning process. Your incident response practice, you want it to improve over time, right? And your game days are going to help you do that as long as you're continuing to build those muscles. You want folks to feel prepared and not blindsided when something actually happens in production. So when we're testing our incident response during the game day, we choose our tests. Your first checkpoint is, do we have the appropriate alert for this scenario, right? If I'm going to do a black hole, am I alerting on that service? If I'm going to do latency testing, do I have some place in my dashboard that's going to show that's actually happening, right? If we've taken a service offline, what happens, right? Same with disk tests or IO tests or any of these other things that you can possibly put into your chaos testing. When your alerts fire, what happens next? Are folks notified appropriately? Has everybody set their stuff up in your platform of choice? PagerDuty, right? Unfortunately, we had an outage at one point where, like, our backup system, not everyone had put their stuff in appropriately. So, like, that's an issue, right? So making sure that everybody has all of their stuff configured the way you expect it. When everyone knows something is up, where do they go? Get your coordination down. Have it documented somewhere. Have alerts come into the appropriate channels. Is there a conference call? Where do folks find out that information? How do they subscribe to additional updates to that particular alert or whatever you're working on? Finally, then, thinking about your troubleshooting before you're in a real failure is essential, but also pretty hard, right? Do folks have access to all the dashboards they need? Can responders access the hosts or repositories or configuration files, whatever else they might need to check things out, to change things, to fail over a database, to restart a service, whatever you have components for? There's a lot of interesting tools for managing the kind of security and access permissions. We partner with some folks at Teleport, which has like this amazing tool that helps you do that stuff. So whatever it is there, you get some opportunity to practice all that, right? You got the newest member of your team, hey man, Judy, it's your turn to practice failing over the production database during our game day. You know, those kinds of things really help the other members of your team feel confident that when something is actually wrong, that they'll be able to fix it. So decide what you're going to experiment on and how long you want to do it. We have folks that will say, we're going to work on this for 10 minutes, see what happens, see what we learn, and then shut it down. So that's also another place to really work through the details before you get into the actual game day. So keeping our goals in mind, we have a general goal. We're going to improve the reliability of our service, but to get the most out of it, we want to be pretty specific, right? When we first started talking about Chaos Monkey and some of these other things back in the day, it was more of a more generalized, we're just going to pull something and see what happens. But to get a lot out of this and to put it back into your improvement process, you really want to be specific. Do we have a dependency that flakes out periodically? Well, let's test around that. Maybe we have some new feature that we just released, or it's in dark mode, right? And we want to test that out. We could do that. Does our service slow down under heavy load? So let's do a load test against it and figure out what's going on there, right? You can also focus on larger problems like DDoS attacks, data center level failures, not that that ever happens, right, with the cloud, and like network trunk outages, all that kind of stuff, just to figure out where you need more defensive coding, where you need more help on certain components. So set your hypothesis. What do you actually expect to find, right? Have your teams been doing defensive coding? Are you expecting a failover? Are you expecting an automatic scale up of your platform? Is there other automation that's going to be in place that will kick in during your scenario to move things around or redeploy jobs or workloads to other places to get around an outage or a problem? Do you have hold downs or timeouts or other components in the request mechanisms in your microservice so that it doesn't sit and spin and just kind of hang? So maybe you expect the whole thing to fail over. That's a great place to start as well. But definitely set your initial hypothesis. Don't just go in and say, oh, we'll just see what happens. Because then it's hard to really collaborate and collate what you're going to learn from it. And then talk about what actually happened. Did it happen the way you thought it was going to? Or did something unexpected happen? Did you actually find that not all of your alerts are telling you the things that you thought they were telling you? When you're collecting up all the data, it's not just about the charts, but also the other related information that might help you in the future. Maybe you butted up against a resource limit in one of your providers that you weren't expecting. Not that I've ever had that happen, right? There's another part of your practice that's going to help you with your incident response. Write your post-game day review, like you would for a regular incident, right? To give your team a chance to organize their thoughts, and here's what we did, and here's what happened, and here's the output we expect from this command when we run it. And if it doesn't look like this, then we know we have an additional problem. So we're building up our knowledge of the system in production. And then talk about what you learned. You went to all this trouble, right, to plan all this stuff, and you've got all these things in place, and all this great stuff is going on. And then what? You just put it on the wiki and hope that somebody reads it someday. No, evangelize it. Talk about it. If you run these as regular practice, have a regular meetup internally, right? Have a center of excellence or whatever guild or whatever you want to call it internally, however you evangelize internally for your processes and your platforms. Make it part of the practice that everyone can then learn from, especially if you're going to then make improvements to major libraries, logging libraries or request libraries or other things that you're working on that will help everybody else in your engineering team so that everyone knows, hey, you know what, we did this test, here's how it failed, here's what it looked like, we made this improvement to these timeouts or packet size or whatever you're doing, and everyone can then benefit from that. And make sure you're putting these back through in your improvements, right? Cannot stress this enough, right? Improving the reliability of the system should be a requirement, right? Your users require it. They're going to abandon you if things are down or flaky, right? Balance the non-feature operational improvements with feature work in order to provide the best experience for your users. The findings from your game day might be generating work that should go into the backlog, should go into a future sprint, and not sit and become tech debt, right, over time. You might want to get to better error messages in your logs. Now we know we practice this on a Tuesday. You don't know if there's going to be a real incident on Wednesday. So the longer you wait to push those improvements in, the higher probability you end up getting that it's going to affect you in a real incident. So pushing things back through as a higher priority is going to help you out. Any number of new improvements might be uncovered, right? Even for simple tests, you might find things you weren't thinking about. So don't abandon them. Get them documented and into your planning. And as your team gets more comfortable with defensive reliability and resilience techniques for your particular platform, it'll be easier to bring those things in and understand what their impacts are going to be, right, for your users. One of the questions we get when we talk about this with our customers is, should you run a surprise game day? How much do you hate your employees? That is your answer. Probably not is the answer, right? Because all of the things we want to practice, all the things we want to learn, lots of the folks that you have in your teams have maybe never seen this before. So when we want to start these practices, especially helping people get through this in a positive way. I know DevOps, we like to have more hugs than not, but like once you have the patterns and the practices well honed, maybe then it's time to say, all right, you know what, everybody in this division, be ready. Friday, we're going to try something. And maybe that's okay if your team is well practiced, you've been at this for a while, maybe you've been doing it for a year, 18 months, and everybody is well versed, right? Starting it out as a surprise, that's a hugely bad idea. Oh my goodness, please don't do that, right? There's a lot more risk going into that than there would be if you were actually actively practicing. So it can feel more real, right? But who never has incidents, right? You never run out of real ones to actually flex on, right? So practice intentionally and be very, very specific about what you're going to do to make people feel more comfortable for when there are real ones. When do you game day? You game day when things are going well. It's going to be hard to talk to your customers about, well, this additional outage over here was us testing, when you've had a few bumps in the road, right? If you're using an SLO model, work through when your knowledge or your budgets, your outage budgets are in the green, right? Get to the place where you're not blowing an error budget on your testing. so that you're in a safe place to do that kind of stuff. Anytime that you're in a sort of a green area, you can go ahead and do that. But you don't need to do it overnight. You don't need to do it in off hours because your incidents are going to happen anytime, right? So you want to make use of that practice. Then when do you not game day? This is going to vary from organization to organization. Depending on your industry, you might not game day between US Thanksgiving and New Year's. Maybe, that's fine, right? Don't game day after a reorganization. Your teams probably don't even know what services they run the first 2 weeks after a reorg. So don't game day then, right? Give folks time to get acclimated with new services that they've been assigned. Don't wait until the week before the busiest time of the year, right? If you happen to be in like the tax prep business, hopefully you weren't game daying last week, right? You want to plan more ahead so you can learn more in advance. So reconsider spending your time doing game days if your business partners, your project managers aren't on board with then taking those improvements into the product. And I understand that can be a battle some places. The operational requirements, the resilience requirements can sometimes be more difficult for folks to understand. And good luck with that, honestly. Like in some places that is more of a battle than you might be willing to fight. I totally understand that. But in the meantime, things to think about: go in with a plan, be intentional, think about what you actually want to prove, what you want to see about your services and what they're doing, and how you're going to recover from those. Use what you learn to improve all aspects of your process. Maybe you need more monitors. Maybe you need fewer monitors, or they just need to be in different places. Maybe you need a better tool for granting access to production environments. Think about all of those things as you're putting these game days together. There's 2 articles listed here. The first one is at Shopify. This is about their process for how they are going through their game day tests. I think this was a 2019 post from them. And then the second one from Azure is actually pretty extensive, and they use the fault injection language, which is kind of interesting too. So that one's super good to read. We document our incident response process at response.pagerduty.com. If you are interested in firing that up, you don't know what an incident commander is or haven't seen that in practice, we have plenty of documentation there for you. It's open source, and you can fork it if you'd like. And then the shameless plug for our podcast. I will say that I didn't catch all of the documentation discussion yesterday. My next guests next week are 2 technical librarians, and that episode will be out on Tuesday. So that's at pageittothelimit.com, and we put that out every 2 weeks. So there you go. Now you can go to lunch. So thank you.